Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. My name is Mallika Kartare, and I work as a business development manager for the Nanomedicine Research Group at Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai. I am here to give a short introduction to the event and session. Again, we welcome and thank all exhibitors, session panelists, and visitors to the inaugural of PHDH virtual event and hope you have visited the wonderful exhibits. Several Indian and foreign companies are participating, and we encourage you to see the displays after the session or at any time till September 25th. We also encourage you to inform to your friends, colleagues to register and participate in several sessions that are scheduled over the next 3 days. We are aware that there are many foreign delegates in the audience and we thank them for attending despite the time difference. Proceeding towards the session, we are pleased to have leading companies represented in this session dedicated to biopharmaceuticals, which is being moderated by Mr. Vishal Gandhi, founder and CEO of BioRx Venture Advisors, an investment and strategic advisory firm dedicated to biotechnology and other facets of healthcare. Founded in 2012 and had good fortune to work with 80 plus clients on making their business more investable. I kindly invite him to initiate with the session. Over to you, Mr. Vishal.
Yeah, thank you, Malika, for the kind words. And good morning, everyone. I must tell you that it's very exciting to see all the panelists here much before time. And at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers under the dynamic leadership of Sushanta and my dear friend Anil for the opportunity to moderate the most exciting session on biopharmaceutical with the theme promising global opportunity for Asian and world. So it's so wonderful to have eminent business leaders and scientific leaders as my fellow panelists. And I think they're all well known in their field and do not really need an introduction. But let me just briefly introduce them before they introduce themselves in detail. So we have Mahesh from Syngene. We all know Syngene as the leading contract research player in biopharmaceuticals from India. Cyrus, a well-known Indian pharma company, Lupin, focusing on biologics R&D. Manohar, a well-known business management professional in the field of cell therapy and stem cells. Last not the least, we have Lin from Singapore, representing ESCO Group of Companies, a leader of biomanufacturing processes. Thank you everyone for joining in. And I assure you that it's going to be a session of deep insights and we will have become more aware and knowledgeable about biopharmaceuticals. As I was already been introduced, so I founded BioRx Venture Advisors in 2012, and we have supported about 80 plus clients in making their businesses more investable in biotechnology, healthcare, digital healthcare, and other facets of healthcare. Let me request my fellow panelists to briefly introduce themselves before we begin into an exciting panel discussion. So I would start with Manohar, if you can briefly introduce yourself.
Good morning once again, everyone. My name is Manohar from Stempeutics. Stempeutics Research is a research and product development company focusing on mesenchymal stem cells. So we are a stem cell company. We have been in this field for the last 14 years. And recently, after traveling, I'm in multiple phases of the product development. Recently, we got approval for an indication called critical limb ischemia. So we are the first company in India to get an approval for the cell therapy product. The product name is Stempucel. We focus on few more indications for unmet medical needs. The other one is non-healing diabetic foot ulcer. And also we focus on knee osteoarthritis. For the last so many years, our focus was how to cross the various milestones and how to get the marketing approval for a cell therapy product. Now, after getting the approval, the challenge what we see is on biomanufacturing. How we can really manufacture, how we can deliver these products to the market, how we can make it affordable. We see a lot of challenges. We have been manufacturing at a smaller scale. We have a facility in India, in Manipal, where even if we operate 24/7, we can produce about 100 billion cells, the mesenchymal stem cells per annum. And this 100 billion cells will be sufficient maybe for about 500 patients, because each patient requires about 200 million cells. So if we have to serve the market, if you want to produce thousands of doses, then there is a big challenge. So where we need to see what technology will be available, and large scale manufacturing is one of the biggest challenge what we see. The other one is how to make it affordable. They're too affordable in India. I mean, even if it is few lakhs, it is so costly in India. How we can bring the cost of manufacturing much lower? There's a kind of an indicator. Can we bring it less than $5 per million cell? So then it can be more affordable. But today it is about 10 times more. So we need to see that how to make it affordable in the cell therapy. And the last one is we took 14 years to get the first approval. We have gone through the regulatory systems. Now I think we need to see how we can bring some innovation in the regulatory affairs so that people don't spend so much time and we can go much faster. Maybe I'll stop here and I will come back once again. Thanks for sharing.
So I think in pharma industry and biopharma, you may take time, but still not sure whether the product will come out or not. So I want to really congratulate you that at least you were able to actually bring the product to the market, and such an exciting field. So congratulations to you. And let me turn to Cyrus. Cyrus, over to you.
Thanks, Vishal. So hello, everybody. My name is Cyrus Karkaria, and I head the biotech division of Lupin. We've been at it we're actually a relatively young entrant compared to some of my other peers. We've been at it for about 10 years now, and our focus is developing biosimilars for the global market. And we are one or two or three companies in India which
Cyrus, we lost you.
Vishal, should we keep going while Cyrus rejoins?
I think you could start with your introduction. That'd be great. Let him join back. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me do a quick. Oh, there. Cyrus is back.
Okay,
so
Cyrus, over to you. Yeah.
Sorry, the power didn't.
Your voice is not clear, Cyrus.
Still considered. Really sorry, the power went off, so it took everything else off. We haven't solved those issues as yet, but hopefully that'll happen soon.
All right, thank you. Now may I turn to Mahesh?
Yes. So good morning, everyone. I'm Mahesh Balgat. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Syngene. Syngene, Vishal, as you pointed out, is a global CRO and a CDMO. So we operate both in the space of research support to the pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and other industries. We also operate in the space of development and manufacturing support. And again, this is across multiple industries. Of course, the biotechnology industry being one of the key components of the service sector that we work with. As for myself, I have a background that's a PhD in medicinal chemistry. Spent a few years working in the US before I moved to India, and recently joined Syngene about a year ago.
Great. So last, not the least, we have Lynn. We are very fortunate to have an international representation, and Lynn is from Singapore. So over to you, Lynn, for your introduction.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting myself. So I'm XL Lin, so part of ESCO Life Sciences group of companies. So you're probably by now the most globalized Singapore life science company. So we have more than 1,500 employees operating in 43 locations, 7 factories around the world. So primarily we are enabling our collaborators and fellow scientists. These are also within the industry. So mainly we are enabling them to lower the cost of goods for their novel cell gene therapies, vaccines as well for both animal health and human health, as well as therapeutic oncolytic cancer vaccines. So we use this using our Thai Motion platform, which is best in class adherent based bioreactor with its own patented cell harvesting system. So we can scale up linearly from very low pack bed volume to 5,000 liters in pack bed volume. And typically we can reduce the cost of goods of vaccines to less than $5. And hopefully for cell therapy like stem cell therapy to the targets of less than $5 per million cells. So we are also using this to produce other therapies such as AAV for gene therapy, which is a part also of the topic later on for some of these new modalities. And we're also using it for gene-edited cell therapy. So producing a lentiviral viral vectors that would then target T cells or other immune cells to then do a gene-edited cell therapy. These are, of course, primarily CD19 based for blood cancer, but there are also other being used and modified now for other solid tumors as well.
Great, very niche, I would say, biomanufacturing processes that you bring to the table. And I think it is so timely that, we are having this panel discussion wherein the synergies between the Asian countries itself could be exploited to position India as a major hub for biopharmaceuticals. So just let me set the context before we get into a panel discussion. So basically, we all know that, we are going through a really an unprecedented challenge, pandemic. And we all have witnessed the potential and the growth in the healthcare sector. So I want to congratulate each one of you that you are actually in a healthcare sector where there is a growth. And we actually in India, we had witnessed that growth. And from a scarcity of PPEs to medical device to pharmaceutical, the very, very, I would say, niche pharmaceutical, we have seen situation where we actually started exporting significantly such products which were not even manufactured pre-pandemic in India. It is so exciting, and with vaccine trials going throughout the world, I think there is a huge opportunity for biopharma players to ramp up their capacity to be able to leverage on this incoming opportunity of manufacturing of biologics, which is vaccines, biobetters, biosimilar, monoclonal antibodies, antibody drug conjugates, and so forth, and so on and so forth. Biologics are a very important part of the, I would say, pharmaceutical industry, and it's one of the fastest growing segment of, industry worldwide. And if you look at the most of the drugs which are approved in the FDA, 8 out of 10 today are biologics. So, this is a segment which cannot be ignored because of the sheer presence of the market share that it owns today. And eventually, I think it is going to be a very important part of the healthcare and bioeconomy in India and, of course, throughout the world. And there are several players in India and Asia that have deeper expertise to develop biologics. And we've heard during the introduction from Mahesh to Cyrus to Manohar that, how they have been able to innovate and now they're looking to actually build a capacity. And not capacity only for their own companies, but at the same time to also offer this as a part of the services, what we have witnessed in the pharma industry, particularly with the growth of contract research and manufacturing services in pharmaceutical. And I think India does have a chance to repeat or rather outgrow what we have witnessed in the CRAM business in pharmaceutical. So with this note, let me turn to my panelists, for them to share their insights and some of the discussion points which can make India as a major hub for biomanufacturing. So the first, comment I would like to seek from each one of you, given your expertise, that is India ready to capitalize the US dollar 100 billion, which is an ever increasing opportunity, and are all the pillars intact? And, so I would like each one of you to reflect on these, theme. And let me start with Mahesh. Mahesh, over to you.
Yeah, thanks again, Vishal. So, let's look at the question of the 100 billion target that we have, right? And I think you made a good point about the fact that this is a very specific and a very interesting industry for us in terms of the potential for the biologics world to actually make a difference in continued progression of number of entities that come to the market, but also the volume of uptake that is going up, right? So if we look at even the last several years that we've come through, the biologics market hold has gone from, about 15 years ago, it was only 16%. And a few years back, it was 25%. And this is just in terms of volume, right? Then there is the component of the value of these, which is even higher. And I won't even get into those, because I think it's important that we really focus on understanding what is it that India needs to do to get there.
Absolutely.
There's the other numbers that I want to offer in terms of the demand for biologics, and that demand for biologics, from a liters perspective, as we start to transition the conversation on manufacturing capacities, there was a demand of about 2,500 kiloliters in 2018. That is expected to be about 4,200 kiloliters in over just a 5-year period. This is the kind of growth that we are expecting to see. Now, what's required to make this transition happen, and what's required for India to capture a significant segment of this particular opportunity? I think there are many different pillars. The three that I want to put on the table is, we need a very, very strong leveraging of the talent base that is there, the knowledge base that is there. And the knowledge base that is there comes from both components of the sector, which is the product manufacturers, so companies like Lupin that Cyrus represents, but it also comes heavily from companies like Syngene, where we have the opportunity to work with many different manufacturers, many different molecules, many different sort of technologies, and bring all of that to light. And therefore, a combination of leveraging the CMO space, the CDMO space, and the product manufacturing space is going to be very, very important for us. The second is going to be with regards to the talent component from an organic growth of talent. So where is the opportunity for that is through the partnering with academic institutions, as well as the companies, to bring out that talent and make those available for us from a fresh minds, innovation, thought processes, keeping up with technologies perspective. The third arm of that I want to focus on is going to be with regards to the regulatory changes. Today, we know that from a regulatory changes perspective, Indian systems operate differently than worldwide systems. And India is making a lot of changes as we speak. Many of those that we have seen, many more that will come. Some of the ones that are really worth mentioning is, the integration that India is working on with regards to the PICS component, for example. All of these bits, the changes that India has done over the last few years from a regulatory norms for clinical trials perspective, all of these bits are actually what is going to be really important for us to leverage the overall growth that we need to have in particular for the biomanufacturing component. The last numbers that I'll leave, and then I'll hand it to others to comment on. But the last component that I want to really emphasize is come back to the contribution of the CMO. And this is not only from our own experience as Syngene, but worldwide, what is recognized is that the hybrid companies or the CMO companies, which means original product manufacturers or manufacturers who offer their capacities as CMOs, that contribution to the biomanufacturing capacity is going to go up from 28% to 36% over the next 5 years. That's very significant when we talk about the volumes that we are referring to. And because India already has its presence in the API market from a CMO leveraging perspective, India will now have to transition and start to leverage CMOs even in the biopharmaceutical space to actually get a fair bit of this market that we are really talking about. So I'll leave it at that and let the others comment too.
Sure. Cyrus, would you like to supplement to what Mahesh said?
Sure, I echo Mahesh's comments. However, there's one big factor also we ought to consider, that the biological manufacturing facilities, there's a huge gestation time before we actually start selling stuff from those facilities. Also, these facilities cost a lot more than what a typical API or a formulation facility would cost. And considering that it could only, at a at some point in time accommodate a few products and a few solid products. So there's a lot more which we need to actually inculcate. And there has to be some, I mean, there has to be a lot of synergy put in place such that, I mean, that sort of capital is around and that sort of capital can be harnessed properly. Um, comparing this sort of manufacturing space to the small molecules, unfortunately, has done a disservice to us for a simple reason. As we see, we don't have that capacity as yet. Um, Places like Syngene have actually done a stellar job at putting that capacity together, but at quite a price. And somehow we need to figure all that in. And secondly, I think there is a huge dearth of talent. So what happens is that there are some stellar institutions which we have in the country which produce some great products, I mean, great people, but then there's nothing in between which can sustain that sort of growth. So something to keep that in mind. And of course, augmenting capacity, as we can clearly see during this COVID crisis, that there's not that much of capacity available in a country compared to what other countries, even Singapore for that matter, has. So we need to be thinking a lot on how to build that infrastructure properly such that, I mean, it benefits the country more than anything else. That's my
Uh,
that's my 2 cents on it.
Manohar, your views on this? You have to unmute me.
You can hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So I agree with Cyrus and Mahesh, but cell and gene therapy is like a greenfield project in India. I mean, still there is not much focus, but I see there is a great opportunity for India to start focusing on cell and gene therapy manufacturing, because I see globally a lot of focus, a lot of investments are happening. And one particular example I wanted to give is regarding Hitachi Chemicals. So Hitachi Chemicals in Japan, they have bought a big plant in the US, PCT cell therapy manufacturing, 100% acquired. They also acquiring in Germany, Abseth. So we are trying to consolidate, considering the future growth in cell and gene therapy. In terms of the global market, it is about $5.78 billion, the reported figure in the cell therapy, and so that also growing. So what I see, Vishal, is the focus, what we need, how India can take a lead in this particular area of cell and gene therapy manufacturing, whether it is MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells, where it is going to the market, or on the CAR-T, or in the lentiviral vector. So there is a huge scope. There is a huge scope. There is an opportunity, but companies need to come forward and try to make investment. Maybe government also has to support to leverage this opportunity, what being offered globally. Maybe I'll stop here and I will come back once again.
Yeah, great. Excel, your reflections on this theme?
Yeah, so I will give some inputs, maybe really from an outside perspective. So, I think as a country, and this is purely looking from the outside, um, there is there are few crossroads in which India as a country really needs to decide what to do with the budget in that sense. For instance, is it strategic to the country to have biosimilars in its portfolio? And this is something that would then need to be looked at of course, from a biosimilar perspective, companies like Lupin and CMO's perspective from Syngene. Is this something that India will want to invest in to compete with the very large players that are out there? If you even look at the recent news this week, Samsung Biologics announced a $2 billion investment, and they're building adding 300,000 liters of tank capacity. So they are now, by 2022, which is when they want the plant to be operation, it will be the largest in terms of tank capacity, right, globally in that sense. So that's in South Korea itself. And then, if you look at China itself, then of course there's a WuXi AppTec, WuXi Biologics that have a huge tank capacity as well. So for us, we look at them as being and they are competing on the scale to really be the largest in class. Of course, Samsung Biologics is also working closely with their government in that sense. So this leads to another point on there being a very strong public-private partnerships. As all of you all know better than myself, for example, Serum Institute of India, which supplies billions of doses of vaccines globally, has also very strong collaborations with your government in terms of having vaccines which are part of the NHIP, and then later on they actually develop, or in some instances maybe even co-develop them in a way to then introduce them into the market. So there's a certain amount of commitment from that perspective, in which the government is able to purchase the vaccines due to your birth cohort, but also then this gives them the first boost in that sense to then be able to supply globally. I'm not sure whether there are such mechanisms in terms of supplying of biosimilars or biobetters in that sense, for whether there will be such reimbursement programs or such insurance programs that can be put in place to better encourage local manufacturers. On Simon's point, in terms of training and education, just to share the perspective, like in China, the government there actually encourages many of our foreign talents that are coming from, that were trained overseas, working in big pharma in Amgen, AbbVie, Novartis in USA, to actually incentivize them to come back into China to then contribute back to the local economy. And they are given a lot of incentives in form of grants or in forms of other methods in order to encourage them to come back. All around the world, as I travel everywhere, there are many Indians who are actually in top positions, all around the world in USA, even in Singapore, right? I was the CEO of Mundi Pharma is from India, for example, right? And there are many other very bright Indians, in many places all around the world, right? So a matter of pulling them back in a way could be looked into. There are many worldwide world-class training centers that are actually operating. One of them is NIBRD in Ireland, and you may be surprised, but NIBRD as well operates in USA, in Philadelphia. This is the hub for cell and gene therapy. NIBRD also operates in Australia through a partnership with one of the universities. So there are actually already a lot of leading training institutes in terms of both biologics and cell and gene therapy. And these are very well established. They already have all of the curriculums on hand and many years of how to train up expertise, both in terms of CMC, regulatory, and compliance in that sense, that could be tapped into in that sense to really partner with your leading institutes within India itself to train the workforce and the population. So, just from an outside perspective, there are many of these areas. Of course, to play in the space for biologics and biosimilars, then given that there are such strong, largest in class companies that are out there that are remanufacturing, Samsung Biologics, which I mentioned, even Celltron is setting up a large 100,000 liter facility for their biologics, in China as well. So then, as mentioned, then India would be like force votes. Of course, on the other hand, India could really play into looking into new modalities that are out there, and some of these are new platform modalities for new cell and gene therapy or other biologics or biobetters in that sense. For example, in the space of biologics, which was also used in COVID-19 for therapeutics, some scientific groups are exploring the use of a single domain antibodies. So these are typically from camels or lemurs or sharks as well. And single domain antibodies could be exploited or used as a biobetter, and they can be used in many other modalities as well. So such single domain antibodies lend themselves very favorable characteristics, especially in terms of cost of goods, right? Because you do not need a mammalian cell culture to express them. They are typically expressed in E. coli or Picaria pastoris. And in India itself already has this infrastructure in place. You have Biozine, which is one of the best companies supplying stainless steel fermenters, and they are supplying the Serum Institute and other vaccine companies as well that are very capable and very strong in fermentation. So this could be a new modality which could be looked into. Of course, then leading in this space in Asia Pacific with Stempeutics in that sense, this is an allogenic cell therapy that could be looked into to further develop and to grow from mesenchymal stem cells to other allogenic cell therapy. Like locally in India, there is a company, Immunil, and they are doing autologous CAR T. But many companies, predominantly in USA and Japan, some in Australia, are working on allogenic CAR T. So these are new modalities as well. If you look at other areas in which could use maybe fermentation or culturing in suspension, then there are exosomes. For instance, these are secreted from mesenchymal stem cells, and a lot of them are actually engineered to use as a drug delivery substances, right? And this could play very well into India's very strong chemical engineering know-how in that sense on how do you load some of these novel substances, into these small extracellular vesicles. Kodiak Biosciences just went into phase 1, so this is a new modality that is able to be looked into both in terms of the new drug development as well as contract manufacturing. Then, of course, last but not least, there are other new areas such as microbiomes, which is sometimes also often overlooked. But Ceres Therapeutics has already proven this new and upcoming modality. They did it for C. diff, and they met their critical milestones for phase 3. In that sense, there are of course newer modalities which are all upcoming and out there, ranging from mRNA, which is also used in many of the COVID-19 vaccine candidates, to then sRNA and oligonucleotides, which is another very interesting area that also could play into India's strengths in terms of chemical engineering. Yeah. So I think I've shared quite a lot of things that are worth thinking about as a country, and helping to shape this strategy would be and to chart a path forwards would be quite interesting in that sense, to see where you would want to play the strengths as with a long history in chemical engineering, and how you can then use that as a base to go into some of these newer modalities.
Thank you, Excel, for sharing, 360-degree view of how India could learn from Singapore and, to become a major biomanufacturing hub. I think your insights are amazing. I could learn a little bit more things which I was not aware about. And I'm sure audience is also, having that wisdom coming from you. Thank you so much for sharing those wonderful insights. So it's time for me to turn to another aspect. I think we've talked about talent. The talent is there, but it is not really ready to be able to help the scale up of such a, businesses, because being a very technique, it requires, I would say, a very niche skills. So talent definitely, I think, will take some time to be able to get through. But at the same time, what I have also observed, that there hasn't been much investments into biopharma in a country like India, as opposed to pharma. If you look at every decent sized pharma company has been able to get at least a small level of private equity funding, which we haven't seen in at least in biopharmaceutical space in India. And so I would request Mahesh, why do we only have 1 or 2 biomanufacturing companies in India which are listed and appreciated by the capital markets, and till we don't change that, I would say, till we don't change the mindset of investors that there is certainly an opportunity to invest in biopharma, I think we can't really reach that scale, because government is doing its bit. Government is investing through various schemes like Make in India, Bio-Pharma Mission. But I don't think it is enough for us to be able to get there where the opportunity is in terms of capitalizing. So Mahesh, your thoughts will be very helpful.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a really important point. Again, we are talking of getting to a dramatically fantastic opportunity, but at the same time, do we have all of the pieces there? And in terms of what is required from the government is one bit, but let's I think it's worthwhile taking a moment to understand why we are in this particular situation of low level of investment, low level of understanding from the markets and from investors and from entrepreneurs, because all of this really contributes to that. And some of the key reasons for that is, one is of course the long gestation period. So Cyrus talked about this, but the second is the very high level of risk that is still involved, even in an established product from a failure perspective. And this is where we need to make sure that we are leveraging not just our experience, but also a lot more of the technology solutions that are there. The failure rates that may be there for a biosimilar or for a from a per batch perspective are much higher when you look at it on a dollar invested versus a dollar returned perspective. And that needs to come down, and there the opportunity is to leverage technology. Now again, then we start talking about putting in more money, again has long gestation period. How do you break this cycle? One of the components is, of course, the governments stepping in, bearing a lot more of the risk along with the investors and along with the entrepreneurial companies or the large established companies to shoulder this burden and promote the growth. There's another component of opportunity that we should look at, and this is based on what the Korean stock exchange has done. And I want to bring this up as something for the government and the Indian structure to really think about. So in the Korean stock exchange in 2017, they came up with what's called as the Tesla policy. And the Tesla policy allows for KOSDAQ, which is not the KOSPI, not the main stock exchange of the Korean markets, but KOSDAQ, to list IPOs for companies with future potential who have not yet posted any profits and who are still in a very early nascent stage of development. What this gives is a lot more opportunity for the public to, one, get aware about such companies that exist, but also these companies to have access to public funding. And since it's only started in 2017, there's limited insight into how successful this has been. But one of the ways to measure the success of this is to look at what has been the growth in the workforce and have these companies been growing in terms of number of people that they have been putting in. And it shows that there's an average increase of 75% in 8 companies that have been listed through such a mechanism. So I think, using such innovative approaches is going to make a difference. The second component is also, of course, going to be, how do you reduce the capex burden on the companies by moving them into more and more OpEx structures? And this is where the CMOs, CROs, CDMO space comes in. Because the CMOs have already invested money in building the infrastructure and in building the capabilities for that manufacturing, it takes the burden out of the manufacturers for their early stage molecules before they have been able to recognize any revenue. And there is more and more of these that need to be promoted within India. We, of course, offer such, but as you mentioned, the number of investors or the number of companies who have been able to really bring this capacity on and make that happen is still limited. And that risk appetite does need to go up through such mechanisms and through the partnerships. Another component that I want to bring up is this movement from capex to opex does not need to be a zero versus 100%. It can be partial. And as India starts to look at more and more of these models of where the innovator companies or biosimilar manufacturers start to partner with the CMO space, we will be able to see this go up, where plants can be put together with a certain capacity that is allocated to the primary investor, which could be a biosimilar manufacturer, for example, and the rest of it is then not captive but available for the rest of the other business that can be brought in. So when we look at such models of managing the investments and addressing the challenges related to long gestation periods, that is what will actually make a difference for how we see growth for the biomanufacturing sector. Because we need to recognize that most Indian entrepreneurs and most background for India is still based on the ways of thinking and the turnaround times and cycles that are related to small molecule API manufacturing, which is of course very different than what we see in the biomanufacturing space.
Sure, thank you. Cyrus, would you like to supplement?
I mean, Mahesh has pretty much covered it very well. All I would like to say is that I think part of this whole, issue we see here is that this sort of very disassociated way of how capacity is being built up, where every company, there are very few companies which have taken this taken a stab at it. And even there, because I mean, capital is scarce, and because I mean, there is always this whole risk appetite thing, which Mahesh clearly pointed out. How do we? I mean, how do we formalize that approach? Is something we need to be thinking about because um, a lot of companies. Let's put it this way: most of the big generic companies in India have aspersions to go into biotech, but only a few have actually taken that step and gone that distance. And why is that so? I mean, so there has to be some sort of mean understanding, I would say, in between where I mean, if there were policies which were more cohesive, I would say that I mean we would need that transition would be much easier. I can bet you that the next 10 years, most of these companies will have capacity, will be going into biomanufacturing because that's the way the whole generics industry is going. But do we need to wait and then play catch up, or do we need to be prepared for it? That's my question more than anything else.
So how well companies like Lupin geared up to an export opportunity? Like you have a very robust portfolio of biosimilars, biobetters. So have you actually have a ready blueprint to be able to embark on exports like the way India has been able to? I would say pharmaceuticals have been able to push themselves much into exports. So do you think biobetters and biosimilars are there yet?
Not yet. I mean, and there are two reasons for that. One is the capex requirements for manufacturing, but the other is that if you're going to do, I mean, and typically a big company like Lupin looks at a global footprint. It doesn't look at just the Indian footprint because, I mean, the costs do not justify the expense. So with situations like that, there is this, the internal, I mean, the amount of cost outlay every trial takes for biosimilars uh, is the company, I mean, and most generic companies are not prepared for those sort of capital outlays. And I would say most of the other biotech companies are not either, I mean, elsewhere. So therein, I think the investment community comes in, where can we actually sustain trials to bring these products out at a very reasonable cost and great quality. And yes, there has been progress in that direction. However, albeit as you very well know, it's probably very slow. And how do we augment that? And that's where the government comes in, perhaps. And again, I mean, it's sort of like this whole catch-22 situation where the investor community is a little skittish because there's no proper regulation which goes in. And to get that proper and cohesive regulation, I mean, well, if that happens, then we can convince the investor community that this is going to be a prudent investment, because the only way they can get this investment up and running is that if we go global. Because India itself, in order to sustain the biosimilar market in India, we need to go global for companies to realize the profits and realize their investment. So that in a nutshell is what I would think is absolutely necessary.
Great, Cyrus. So over to Manohar. Manohar, tell me one thing. 10 years back, raising capital for a stem cell like a company, was difficult. And, you landed up actually partnering with the pharma company Cipla. And I think somewhere, because that was a great strategy to partner with Cipla, because that must have also helped you to, carve through the difficult path of regulatory, pathway to be able to bring the product to the market. But, do you think that was a good decision?
I think, most of the points covered by Mahesh. So one of the key things is in the cell and gene therapy, it is more complex compared to biosimilars or biologics. If it takes 10 years at the gestation period in biologics, you need to add another 3-4 more years. It takes about 14 years, 15 years when it comes to regenerative medicine and cell therapy. So very difficult to raise money from private equity. I have gone and asked many people, immediately they ask what is the revenue, what is your margin. So typical the private equity players goes based on the top line and the bottom line. And since the gestation period is very long, it was finding it very difficult to raise money through private equity. So generally, I mean, people like us sell and gene therapy companies. One is to go to BIRAC, to go to DBT and raise money, but that's very small money. So we need to look for the strategic alliance and players like the pharma companies. It's good that I think we went to Cipla in 2009. They have been investing money for the last 10 years. Of course, they also are looking forward when the return on investment, like Mahesh was telling, when we can get, we have put so much money, can we really make money out of it? But I think it's a good decision to go with the Cipla, and subsequently we of course tied up with Alchem for another indication. But to go from the value for the R&D, I mean, still people are reluctant to invest. If we have a ready-made product, even like for COVID-19, we are trying to conduct a trial with ICMR. So we see an opportunity of using stem cells. When I go and ask some money from pharma companies, oh, Manohar, whether you have finished everything, if you are ready, you tell us, we are ready to join. So people are not willing to take the risk more. They want to see whether you are in phase 3 or you are in phase 4 of the product development so that the risks are retired and then they can make money quickly. So raising money from India is difficult, and we are somewhat lucky. We could raise money through Cipla, through Alchem, and recently last year we raised money through another biopharma company called Kemble. They have put some money into therapeutics. But the goal is how we can go global. Can you raise money from global companies like Pfizer or other people? Can they invest money into a startup company or a company started from India? There also we feel a lot of challenges, how to create a globally compliant cell bank, globally compliant starting material. There are some hiccups in India to make those things. So we need to see whether we can make it outside India. We can go to US to make the globally compliant starting material. So if we fix some of the things what we have learned as we went along, I mean, we focus on India. We create the cell bank based on the Indian guidelines. When we go to US, they say, oh, no, we cannot, I mean, we cannot use the cell bank because it's not FDA compliant. Why is not FDA compliant? You not use FDA approved kits, you not use FDA approved labs. So there are many challenges. So we need to see, we have learned it, but now we know that what's to be done. We can go there, and raising money still is an issue. But people are now coming forward after seeing the first product has been approved in India. Oh, that means, okay, cell therapy can be commercialized, and how big can be business. And people are willing to put money as a growth capital rather than as a seed fund or as an investment in the R&D side. So it is changing, but it's going to take some time. Still, it's more on strategic alliance locally, and we have to see how we can have a global partnership also.
Yeah, great. I think it's so interesting to hear that Stemputic is still a startup. Because I know Stemputic for at least 11 years, and you call it startup, it's amazing, you know, because I think a startup is not about the life cycle of the company. I think it's about the way companies are managed. And, you know, doing a cutting R&D, I think requires a startup culture. And it's better to continue to call yourself startup. Yeah, fantastic. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from Singapore. And so is the Singapore investment ecosystem exactly same what, you know, my fellow panelists have also highlighted? Lynn, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's quite similar. So of course, you look at the stock exchange. There is a way to fast track when you list in the Singapore Stock Exchange in our Catalyst main board. There is some sort of a fast track way to then actually at the subsequent stage list on Nasdaq in USA. But the many biotech companies in Singapore also face similar challenges, of course, in terms of raising money from both family offices or angels in that sense to then the more typical VCs and PEs. You know, I think at the end of the day, which was also mentioned by Mahesh and Power Cyrus, right? There's a very long cycle to develop any of these novel biologics, right? And you know, many PEs or VCs have a very short time frames in terms of a return on investment, right? So many funds are always looking at a 5-year, and you know, many of them are really investing more in the growth stage at Series B and Series C rather than an early stage. portion. Of course, in Singapore, there are two VCs that are looking primarily at early stage. But it also brings back to another point which I mentioned, that in order to then lower the risk in that sense, and this is also what is typically done by many companies in USA, then many biotech companies take on a platform approach instead, right? So they develop a platform that even if one indication for one reason fails, there are many other indications in which can be gone into using the same platform. So and then that is more appealing generally to the investment community, because then there is a less risk in that sense. In some form, in that sense, Therapeutics is kind of a platform cell therapy because they have many strong patents in their bone marrow derived master cell banking. So this can go after many indications. Of course, other than CLI, which is approved, then Manohar mentioned they are going to osteoarthritis, and then for non-healing direct foot ulcer. So in that sense, it is in some ways a platform technology, right? That you can then using the same patented master cell banks and processes, then go into different indications. In Asia, I would say this kind of listing in that sense on a secondary board, this is so very common in even in Hong Kong. So if you look at the stock exchange in China and Hong Kong, then it's only in Hong Kong that you have this secondary board listing, in which even if you're pre-revenue, then I guess similar to Korea in that sense, then you can list there as well, right? So then you are able then to sell your technology and then raise money in terms of that kind of exit. So I think, of course, in Singapore, there are a lot of there are many family offices and many angels as well that are investing at a smaller stage. In Singapore, other than investments, we are very strong in terms of there are many grant mechanisms that are given by our Singapore government bodies. So we have Enterprise Singapore (ESG) that gives grants in terms of having a POC and POV grants. So this is a grant amount of up to $500,000 US, and this is given to early stage companies. So I think actually it's a combination of both government sector that allows technologies to be easily licensed out from the academic setting into then forming a biotech company, and in combination with some of these grant mechanisms that actually really helps our thriving ecosystem here in Singapore to have many of these startups in that sense. And then over the years, there have been more and more players coming in at different stages of investment. And I think in terms of biotech, because in Singapore we have some big exits in terms of the biotech space, exiting to big or partnerships with big pharmaceuticals. So there's Carmine Therapeutics that has a huge $900 million deal with Takeda. This is doing a type of red blood cell extracellular vesicles. Before that, it was last year, it was sold to Boehringer Ingelheim. We had Endorphin Therapeutics. This was spun out from Duke NUS, one of our leading institutes of higher learning in Singapore. So I think due to this, in that sense, there are more and more startups and a biotech culture that's up and coming. Singapore is a very small country, so the government is placing huge emphasis into biotech and healthcare, especially in these period during this COVID-19 pandemic, right? Because
Phil, I have a direct question for you. A company like Therapeutics has a better chance to raise capital in Singapore or not?
Yeah, I think definitely there is a better chance actually for a company like Therapeutics to raise capital in Singapore. I think the stem cell space, we are really at the tipping point. So from in addition to Therapeutics, there's a Pluristem from Israel, Mesoblast in Australia. Mesoblast is actually also operating in Singapore.
Manohar may need to think about hiving off the IP asset. The next
I will call Excel after this meeting.
Absolutely great.
to raise some money. Otherwise, so difficult.
10 minutes to go to close the session. So I have, I would like to, thank each one of you. And we are very fortunate that, some of the audience actually had shared the question in advance for each one of you. And while there are multiple questions I have received for each one of you, I would only be entertaining one question for each one of you, considering your specific area of interest. So Mahesh, the question has been asked to you that when do we see the first new biological entity coming out of India, which could be commercialized globally? Which year? Just come to the year.
Wow. Okay. We know it's a 7 to 10 year cycle to get a molecule approved and on the market. But actually, let's face it. The itolizumab product of Biocon, which is a new molecular entity, is actually going through clinical trials in the US as we speak. And so this is something that I do expect. And since it is a drug that is useful in COVID, I do expect that we should be able to close that
Faster approval.
filing much faster than we normally do. And so I think that would really open up in a big way the recognition of the fact that Indian biopharma can get approved drugs in US FDA markets. And I think that's something for us to look forward to in the coming months to a few quarters.
Great, great. So, Lynn, there is a direct question for you. It says that what is it that India and Singapore can do together to increase the investment, in the biopharmaceutical industry? Is there any broad thoughts that you have?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, so Singapore and Israel, we actually have what we call a CERT grant. So this is a grant called jointly between Singapore and Israel to then encourage partnerships cross border in terms of applying for such grants and funding in that sense. So this is really the first thing that comes to mind actually. Yeah.
Great. Cyrus, there's a question for you. It says that when do we see the biosimilar actually becoming an attractive potential investment opportunity?
I would say about now. I mean, because now there have been some, so we've already have a global product out in the market. Our counterpart Biocon has a few products out in the market. And actually, especially for Biocon Biologics, I mean, the investor community has actually evaluated it, and it's actually in the multiple $1 billion. So from the investment point of view, actually, we see an inflection out there. Of course, they've already shown profits. And the inevitability of this is just like generics, where it took about almost 10 years from the time the Hatch-Waxman Act was passed to actually generics gaining steam. I see the same thing with biosimilars, and it has to be the US because US is the biggest market. And I mean, there has been inroads, and what we need to see is more inroads out there. As we see, the European market is actually wherever, as soon as a biosimilar comes in the market, the actual innovator gets to be insignificant within a few years in a lot of major markets. So I could see the same thing happening even in the US market. It's still not happened, but I think there are signs that it would happen soon enough when there is enough competition from biosimilars coming in. Right now, there's still not enough competition for it to sustain that sort of momentum.
Thank you, Cyrus, for those
Sure.
insights. Manohar, for you, there is a question saying that there's a lot of stem cell research happening in the country for 20 years, but yet we haven't seen either stem cell or cell therapies, in therapeutics, so maybe your company is an exception because the sheer management leadership that you exhibit, and of course the support of partnerships that you have had. But we haven't seen too many things happening as far as therapeutics is concerned. So what is it required to be done there?
I think one is the regulatory framework. There is no clear-cut regulatory framework was there in the country. It took a long time. We had multiple guidelines in the country. One is published by Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR. The other one is published by the CDSCO, or from Drug Control General of India. So there were no clear framework or the path forward in terms of how, first of all, even the definition of stem cell itself there was an ambiguity. Whether it is a product or is it a therapy which can be done by a doctor. So, since there was no clarity, as Stampede, we worked with the government. We developed the entire thing framework along with the government. If the regulations are not there, create the regulations. which is comparable with the FDA. So one particular issue is on the regulatory framework and ambiguity. We want to see that yes, both can be merged together. We have one guideline which people can follow. The other one is so many committees. Once again, if you want to get an approval for a clinical trial, we have to go through 3-4 committees. Once again, it takes very, very long time. So as we discussed earlier, the gestation period is long. There are multiple committees, multiple guidelines. All things are now settling down.
So there are single windows, but there are again multiple windows within single windows.
Yeah, right. So yeah. So these are the which are the hiccups what had, and also people need to see. Ultimately, science has to drive the business. It's not the other way around. Where there is an opportunity, whether we can just jump in there. We need to have a strong science. We need to focus on the science. What are the potency of the stem cells? What are the potency markers? There also, I think we need to compare globally and then see how we can really strengthen our science in terms of taking from bench to bedside.
Great. I like that word B2C, science to business. I think that's important. Right?
Yeah.
That's how we can sustain innovation. Otherwise, there would not be actually a chance to sustain innovation. So I think with that note, I'm going to pause here and I would just ask each one of you to share one-liner concluding remarks before I formally close the session. So, Lynn, you would like to share a concluding remarks? Just single point.
Yeah, I think in conclusion, India has a very bright prospects and a lot to leverage from a very strong foundation. So now it's really biologics and cell and gene therapy is the new age of biology. So it will be really exciting to see how Singapore and India could work together to help each other.
Perfect. So that's the starting of a bilateral relationship. Great. Cyrus, over to you.
I think we need to just work on the ecosystem better within the country to get biologics at the same level as what they are with small molecules. So.
Yeah. I think BioRec has taken a leadership in creating that wonderful ecosystem. But I think the ecosystem further needs to be scaled up, to support many companies like Syngene. I think that's the need. Mahesh, yes. Your concluding remarks.
Yeah, so I would add to that. I think we need to do a lot more. One of the things that we need to learn from what we've done with the API, now we are realizing that we need to be self-sufficient in API. Well, we need to recognize that much earlier right now, and build that for the biopharmaceuticals. And no point thinking about it 20 years from now that we should have done something about it, right?
13,000 crores now allocated for API. I think we should have 13,000 crores allocated for biomanufacturing right away. So
there
that next pandemic, unfortunately, even if it happens, we are ready. I think that's the bottom line. Great, Mahesh.
Absolutely.
Over to Manohar.
Yeah, I think regenerative medicine is the future. People need to invest. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint, but ultimately, if we follow the rules and regulations, we can make money.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, all my fellow panelists, for sharing your wonderful insights, and amazing audience for your patient hearing. We have stretched a little bit, but in the end, I like to congratulate and compliment PHDH.world for organizing such a well-thought panel discussion, which were held yesterday, today, and our session 2. And so thank you once again, everyone, for joining in, and look forward to collaborating with each one of you. Thank you so much. It's time to sign off. All right, bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Thanks.
Bye, man.
Thank you, Cyrus. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cyrus.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks,
you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Vishal, for leading the show.
All right. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.